When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit, Chapter 21. Omama arrived at Great Aunt Sarah's just before Easter and came to see Mamma and the children the following afternoon. With the help of the concierge, whose leg was now better, Mamma had cleaned and tidied the flat so that it looked as nice as possible, but nothing could disguise the fact that it was very small and sparsely furnished. "Can't you find anywhere bigger?" asked Mamma while they were all having tea on the red oilcloth in the dining room. "A bigger flat would cost more," said Mamma, helping Omama to some homemade apple flan. "We can barely afford this." "But surely your husband—" Mamma seemed quite surprised. "It's the Depression, Mother," said Mamma. "Surely you've read about it. With so many French writers out of work, no French paper's going to engage a German to write for them, and the Daily Parisian can't afford to pay very much." "Yes, but even so—" Mamma looked round the little room, rather rudely, thought Anna, for after all it wasn't as bad as all that. And at that very moment, Max, tilting his chair as usual, collapsed on the floor with a plateful of apple flan in his lap. "This is no way for children to grow up." Mamma finished her sentence exactly as though Max had crystallised the thought for her. Anna and Max burst into uncontrollable laughter, but Mamma said, "Nonsense, Mother," quite sharply, and told Max to go and get himself cleaned up. "As a matter of fact, the children are doing extremely well," she told her Mamma, and added when Max was safely out of the room, "Max is working for the first time in his life." "And I'm going to take the certificat d'études," said Anna. This was her big news. Madame Socrates had decided, since her work had improved so much, that there was now no reason why she shouldn't take the examination in the summer with the rest of the class. "The certificat d'études," said her Mamma. "Isn't that some kind of elementary school examination?" "It's for French 12-year-old children," said Mamma, "and Anna's teacher thinks it remarkable that she should have caught up so quickly." But her Mamma shook her head. "It all seems very strange to me," she said, and looked sadly at Mamma. "So very different from the way you were brought up." She'd bought presents for everyone, and during the rest of her stay in Paris, as in Switzerland, she arranged several outings for Mamma and the children which they enjoyed and would never normally have been able to afford. But she didn't really understand their new life. "This is no way for children to grow up," became a sort of catchphrase in the family. "This is no way for children to grow up," Max would say reproachfully to Mamma when she'd forgotten to make his sandwiches for school, and Anna would shake her head and say, "This is no way for children to grow up," when the concierge caught Max sliding down the banisters. After one of Mamma's visits, Papa, who usually managed to avoid meeting her, asked Mamma, "How is your mother?" And Anna heard Mamma reply, "Kind and utterly unimaginative as usual." When it was time for Mamma to go back to the south of France, she embraced Mamma and the children fondly. "Remember now," she told Mamma, "if you're ever in difficulties, you can send the children to me." Anna caught Max's eye and mouthed, "This is no way for children to grow up." And though it seemed mean, in the face of all of Mamma's kindness, they both had to make terrible grimaces to stop themselves from bursting into giggles. After the Easter holidays, Anna could hardly wait to go back to school. She loved it all since she'd learned to speak French. Suddenly the work seemed quite easy, and she was beginning to enjoy writing stories and compositions in French. It was not a bit like writing in German. You could make the words do different things, and she found it curiously exciting. Even homework was no longer such a burden. The large lumps of French, history and geography, which had to be learned by heart, were the hardest part, but Anna and Max had discovered a way of mastering even this. If they studied the relevant passage last thing before going to sleep, they found they always knew it in the morning. By the afternoon it began to fade, and by the following day it was completely forgotten, but it stuck in their memories just as long as they needed it. One evening Papa came into their bedroom when they were hearing each other's lessons. Anna was about Napoleon, and Papa looked amazed as she reeled it off. It began, "Napoleon was born in Corsica," and then followed a long list of dates and battles until the final, "He died in 1821. "What an extraordinary way to learn about Napoleon," said Papa. "Is that all you know about him?" "But it's everything," said Anna, rather hurt, especially as she hadn't made a single mistake. Papa laughed. "No, it's not everything," he said, and settling down on her bed he began to talk about Napoleon. He told the children about Napoleon's childhood in Corsica with his many brothers and sisters, about his brilliance at school and how he became an officer at 15 and commander of the entire French army at the age of 26, how he'd made his brothers and sisters kings and queens of the countries he conquered but could never impress his mother, an Italian peasant woman. "C'est bien pourvu que ça dure," she would say disapprovingly at the news of his every new triumph, which meant, "It's good as long as it lasts." Then he told them how her forebodings came true, how half the French army was destroyed in the disastrous campaign against Russia, and finally of Napoleon's lonely death on the tiny island of St. Helena. Anna and Max listened entranced. "It's just like a film," said Max. "Yes," said Papa thoughtfully, "yes it is." It was nice, thought Anna, that Papa had more time to talk to them these days. This was because, owing to the Depression, the Daily Parisian had been reduced in size and could no longer print off so many of his articles. But Mamma and Papa didn't think it was a good thing at all, and Mamma in particular was always worrying about money. "We can't go on like this," Anna once heard her say to Papa. "I always knew we should have gone to England in the first place." But Papa only shrugged his shoulders and said, "It'll sort itself out." Soon after this, Papa became very busy again, and Anna could hear him typing till late at night in his room. So she assumed that it had indeed sorted itself out and stopped thinking about it. She was, in any case, much too interested in school to pay much attention to what was happening at home. The certificat d'études loomed ever larger and closer, and she was determined to pass it. After only a year and 9 months in France, she thought this would be a very splendid thing. At last the day arrived, and early one hot morning in July, Madame Socrates led her class through the streets to a neighbouring school. They were to take the exam, supervised by strange teachers, so as to make it quite fair. It had all to be got through in one day, so there wasn't much time for each of the many subjects they were to be examined in. There was French, arithmetic, history, geography, singing, sewing, art and gym. Arithmetic came first, an hour's paper in which Anna thought she acquitted herself quite well. Then French dictation, then a 10-minute break. "How did you get on?" Anna asked Colette. "All right," said Colette. So far it hadn't been too bad. After break they were given 2 papers of questions on history and geography, each lasting half an hour, and then disaster. "As we're a little short of time," announced the teacher in charge, "it's been decided that this year, instead of examining candidates in both sewing and art, and adding the marks together as in previous years, you'll be examined in sewing only, and this will count as a whole subject." Sewing was what Anna was worst at. She could never remember the names of the different stitches, and perhaps because Mamma was so bad at it, she thought the whole business was an awful waste of time. Even Madame Socrates had never been able to persuade her to become interested in it. She'd cut out an apron for her to hem, but Anna had been so slow at getting on with it that by the time it was finished she'd grown too tall to wear it. The teacher's pronouncement therefore plunged her into deep gloom, which was confirmed when she was given a square of material, a needle and thread, and some incomprehensible instructions. For half an hour she guessed wildly, tore her thread and picked frantically at knots which seemed to appear from nowhere, and finally handed in a piece of sewing so ragged and crumpled that even the teacher collecting it looked startled at the sight of it. Lunch in the school playground with Colette was a glum affair. "If you fail one subject, you automatically fail the whole exam?" Anna asked as they sat eating their sandwiches on a bench in the shade. "I'm afraid so," said Colette, "unless you get distinctions in another subject, then that makes up for it." Anna ran through the exam she'd already taken in her mind. Except for sewing, she'd done well in them all, but not well enough to have got distinctions. Her chances of passing seemed very slender. However, she cheered up a little when she saw the subject set for French composition in the afternoon. There were 3 to choose from, and one of them was a journey. Anna decided to describe what she imagined Papa's journey must have been like when he travelled from Berlin to Prague, with a high temperature, not knowing whether or not he'd be stopped at the frontier. There was a whole hour allowed for it, and she wrote Papa's journey. It became more and more vivid to her. She felt she knew exactly what it must have been like, what Papa's thoughts must have been, and how, owing to the temperature, he'd keep getting confused between what he was thinking and what was actually happening. By the time Papa had arrived in Prague, she'd written nearly 5 pages, and she just had time to check them through for punctuation and spelling before they were collected. She thought it was one of the best compositions she'd ever written, and if only it had not been for the beastly sewing, she would now be sure of having passed. The only exam still to come was singing and gym. The singing test was held separately for each child, but as time was getting short, they were very brief. "Sing the Marseillaise," commanded the teacher, but stopped Anna after the first few bars. "Good, that'll do," she said, and then cried, "Next!" There were only 10 minutes for gym. "Quickly, quickly," cried the teacher as she herded the children into the playground and told them to spread out. There was another teacher to help her, and together they arranged the children in 4 long lines, a metre or 2 apart. "Attention," cried one of the teachers. "Everyone stand on your right leg with your left leg raised off the ground in front of you." Everyone did, except Colette, who stood on her left leg by mistake and had surreptitiously to change over. Anna stood dead straight, her arms held out to balance herself and her left leg raised as high as she could. Out of the corner of her eye she could see some of the others, and nobody's leg was as high off the ground as her own. The 2 teachers walked between the lines of children, some of whom were now beginning to wobble and collapse, and made notes on a piece of paper. When they came to Anna, they stopped. "Very good," said one of them. "Really excellent," said the other. "Don't you think?" "Oh, definitely," said the first teacher, and made a mark on a piece of paper. "That's it, you can go home now," they called, when they got to the end of the line, and Colette rushed up to Anna and embraced her. You've done it," she cried. "You've got distinctions in gym, so now it won't matter if you failed in sewing." "Do you really think so?" said Anna, but she felt pretty sure of it herself. She walked home through the hot streets glowing with happiness and could hardly wait to tell Mamma all about it. "You mean to say that because you were so good at standing on one leg, it won't matter if you can't sew?" said Mamma. "What an extraordinary exam." "I know," said Anna, "but I suppose it's things like French and arithmetic that are really important, and I think I did quite well in those." Mamma had made some cold lemon squash, and they sat drinking it together in the dining room while Anna rattled on. "We should have the results in a few days' time. It can't be much more, because it's nearly the end of term. Wouldn't it be grand if I'd really passed after less than 2 years in France?" Mamma agreed that it would indeed be grand. When the doorbell rang, and Max appeared looking pale and excited. "Mamma," he said, almost before he got through the door, "you've got to come to the prize giving on Saturday. If you've got anything else on, you've got to cancel it. It's very important." Mamma looked very pleased. "Have you won the Latin prize then?" she asked, but Max shook his head. "No," he said, and the rest of the sentence seemed somehow to stick in his throat. "I've won," he said, and finally brought it out. "I've won the Prix d'Excellence. That means they think I'm the best student in the class." Of course, there was delight and praise from everyone. Even Papa was interrupted in his typing to hear the great news, and Anna thought it was just as wonderful as everyone else. But she couldn't help wishing that it had not come just at this very moment. She'd worked so hard and thought so long about passing this certificat d'études. After this, even if she did pass, how could anyone possibly be impressed? Especially since her success would be partly due to her talent for standing on one leg. When the results were announced, it was not nearly as exciting as she'd expected. She had passed, so had Colette, and so had most of the class. Madame Socrates handed each successful candidate an envelope containing a certificate with her name on it. But when Anna opened hers, she found something more. Attached to the certificate were 2 10-franc notes and a letter from the mayor of Paris. "What does it mean?" she asked Madame Socrates. Madame Socrates' wrinkled face broke into a delighted smile. "The mayor of Paris has decided to award prizes for the 20 best French compositions written by children taking the certificat d'études," she explained. "It seems that you have been awarded one of them." When Anna told Papa, he was just as pleased as he had been about Max's Prix d'Excellence. "It's your first professional fee as a writer," he said. "It's really remarkable to have earned it in a language not your own." End of chapter 21.